you did you meet Kurt or Chris first?
Well, so Chris and I had known each other for a lot longer than Kurt. I met Chris first, and actually his brother Robert and I were in a band together.
Ah. What was the name of the band?
We didn't even get that far. We just had a couple of rehearsals up at his house. Literally, you know, I was 14, 15 years old. I had a guitar and an amplifier, and my buddy Brett Walker had a drum kit, and we got on a East County transit bus, rode it to town, got off at the bottom of Thinkamy Hill, and humped the gear up the hill to Chris's house.
Up on Fairfield.
Yeah, and that's where, and I knew Chris already, but Robert was the one that I was interested in playing with.
Yeah.
And would you know, agreed to try to start a band or whatever.
So are you closer to Robert's age then, and would have gone to school or had classes with him
No,
at this point?
no, Chris and I are the same age.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And at that point, when you started playing with Robert and forming this group, was Chris involved in anything?
Well, yeah, I mean, so Chris was already hanging out with the Melvins as far as I can remember, but I mean, that event, do you know about the Love Buzz Big Cheese single?
Yes.
So on that single, on the original, there's an inscription right around the label. Do you know what it says?
No.
It says, "Why don't you sell those guitars and buy shovels?" Now that has nothing to do with Nirvana. That happened at one of these rehearsals that I had with Robert and Brett Walker at Chris Novoselic's house.
Okay.
And so we get up there, and we're in the bedroom. The two boys were sharing a bedroom. Chris wasn't there, so it was Robert and Brett and I. And we set up all the gear and we're trying to play, and Chris came home. And so he comes in, and that's really where Chris and I first talked about music and stuff. And I found out that he is quite well educated, and I mean, way more than I was. And he started talking about B.B. King and different things, and was showing me different licks on guitar and whatnot. And about that time, it must have been 5:30 or something like that, the boy's dad came home, Christoph. And they both seemed to be kind of concerned about that, and he came up the stairs, stomp, 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 and pushed in the door. And Chris is, you know, a big guy then, at that age even, and so he was just telling his dad it's fine, we're just in here, a couple of friends came over, and they're just trying to play music, that's all. And he was upset, and he was confrontational. You know, he's Croatian, European, and he's like, "Who are you? What's your name?" And scared the crap out of both Brett and I, and embarrassed Chris and Robert completely. And anyway, Chris is saying, "Dad, you know, it'll be fine. Just leave us alone, and they'll leave here in a little bit." And he looked at all of us and he says, "Why don't you guys sell those goddamn guitars and buy shovels and do something useful?" And that was it.
Wow.
And he left. So it had nothing to do with this Nirvana band, but all these years later, it became, you know, a thing where they would, you know, there was a story.
Yeah.
And then when they first, I mean, that single was like the very first, but the most, like the highest level of success they ever expected.
Sure.
You know, that first single. So they, you know, utilized it for that quote on that record.
Wow,
You know,
that's a great story.
yeah. And it's not in the books.
Yeah, I've never heard that before.
Yeah, it's, I mean, it has nothing to do with Nirvana,
Mhm.
but it has everything to do with Nirvana.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it has to, and I think it has a lot to do with probably the mindset of probably the adults in the room at that time on the harbor.
Well, yes, it's, I mean, very working class.
Yes.
And exactly, I mean, it's still kind of, today, I mean, I don't know about today. I guess, you know, like when I got married in the late 80s and early 90s, it was still kind of a thing with the, the working class and whether or not music was a specific way for a young person to be successful, you know. And so, you know, you always want your sons or your daughters to do whatever to be the best, and you don't go, oh, you should follow your dreams, especially if you're a working class immigrant,
Yeah.
you know, family.
Very practical approach. to
Yes, I
life.
mean, you
Yeah.
learn a skill that you,
Yeah.
you can always fall back on.
Yeah.
And that was the message my dad gave me and my mom gave me.
Sure.
And that's exactly what Christoph was trying to tell his sons.
So when this was taking place, and this was relatively early on with knowing Chris and Robert, this would be about when would you say, around 85?
82,
82, oh, that early.
83,
Okay.
around
Okay.
that time.
Okay.
82, 83,
Yeah.
82 maybe.
Okay.
So even before the Melvins were like officially
Yeah.
even happening, because also right around that time is when I saw the Melvins' first performance at Thriftway and at Guller's down on the, there was a thing called the Unboat River Float.
Uh-huh.
And it was the precursor to Metal Church with Mike Murphy singing Shrapnel played, and the Melvins opened. And then back in a year later after that maybe, or maybe it was that same year, the Melvins opened again for Metal Church when Mike was out of the band and Dave Wayne was in the band,
Mhm.
and they played the show at the DNR
The
Theater.
DNR. Oh, okay. So,
And I was with Rogues Gallery at that time.
okay.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you brought that up. So the DNR show, where the Melvins opened for Metal Church, I've read this a couple different ways, and one of the stories, well, maybe more than one of the stories, says that it was a satellite project of the Melvins billed under the Stiff Woodies. And for the final song, Chris comes out on stage. I believe he's playing guitar and singing.
Yeah, so I don't know about the Stiff Woodies and that whole thing, because, I mean, that was before I was formally introduced to really any of them.
Okay.
Like I said, I knew Chris's brother. I knew Chris, that's who he is, but we weren't like friends, really. I was friends with his younger brother at that time.
Yes.
And I had been working with Black Ice, who were doing this, you know, basically a cover band, but very much heavy metal, Judas Priest, Rush, that kind of thing, Van Halen. And so when they played the show with Metal Church, and I didn't really know anything about Metal Church or what Shrapnel was all about, it was like sort of the next level of they were all moving into this originals kind of thing, and so with Rogues Gallery was playing, still continuing at the covers, and so when I saw the Melvins playing, they were playing really fast, like early Black Flag style.
Okay.
And Mike Dillard was on drums, and I don't even know what they did. It was just like one big run-on song, and it was, you know, and
Yeah.
I didn't have a palette for that style yet, and so it was just like a huge wall of sound, and I saw what they were doing, and it sounded amazing. But when Chris came out, the very last song, and they played Sunshine for Your Love by Cream. They played it really fast, and Chris did sing. And I don't know, I don't know that there was much talk about it from what I remember. He just came out, plugged in, and off they went. And it was incredible. I knew what they were doing. It became a song that I was interested in learning because of that night. And then years later, and then Rogues Gallery was on, and then Metal Church was on, and that was it. And so between the Thriftway show, the Gullers Unboat River Float show, which I don't even know the date of that one, and then the DNR theater show. I mean, it could have been the same year, all in 6 months time, or a week's time, for all I know. It's that the precision on that is beyond me at this stage of the game.
But you do know that when Chris performs with the Melvins for this final song at the DNR, this is still pre
Kroger.
Kurt and Chris playing together.
Absolutely, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I don't, and that stuff that happened with Fecal Matter and the Stiff Woodies and all that stuff. That's the stuff of legends when I was in Phoenix. So I left in 1984, like December, last half of December of '84. I left and didn't come back until '86.
Okay.
And so all that happened during that period of time when I was gone, except Chris moved to Phoenix and stayed with me.
Right, yeah.
And that's when we really became friends and started the longer conversation about music, and where he got involved with teaching me how to play guitar and whatnot.
Shelley came along too.
Yeah.
To Phoenix.
Yeah. And looking, with hindsight, I look back at it and go, oh, I see. Shelley and I were actually better friends. She was more interested in having a devotional relationship than Chris or Kurt. They were looking, still the competitive, like, what can I get out of you? What can I get out of you? What can I get out of you? And that was.
Did you meet Shelley first, or?
I think we had some friends, mutual friends. That's how we all, again, we were all sort of the outcasts of the harbor, which there weren't a lot. Everybody was sort of still trying to fit in very desperately. You were either an academic or an athletic superstar or a socialite, and we didn't qualify for any of those. And so it was just really not any. There was a pretty small clique of people.
Right. Yeah. So before Chris and Shelley moved down to Phoenix, let's rewind a little bit to when, and tell me if you probably were friends with Chris at one point. He was working for Foster's Paint, and Shelley had a job at McDonald's, which was, I think Foster's was at that point, I think they had a building probably somewhere up front where the Wichita Mall was. The story is that she would stop and chat it up with Chris on her way to her job, and eventually he got her phone number.
And I mean, I know a little bit more about Chris from working when he worked at Taco Bell, because I also had a friend that worked at Taco Bell.
Yeah.
And actually a couple of them.
This is the Boomer era. His friend Boomer, the kid that went to Aberdeen High School and set off some type of explosive device, and then ended up having to go to Monty to live with family.
Well, I don't know who Boomer is.
Okay.
I know, I have a friend, I'm not going to say his name right now because but it's not Boomer.
Okay.
And he blew the glass out of the greenhouse at the top of the Phillips building, and with a pipe bomb. And
This
that
was at the
the
campus at
Weatherwax. Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah.
I wondered where it took place at.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And
yeah.
he was actually, he later ended up living at my house for a couple of, I don't know, months or something.
And you were living in Aberdeen?
Central Park.
Oh, in Central Park.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So eventually, Chris and Shelley would get together, and he would move into her apartment. I believe it was down across the street from the fire department there in Aberdeen.
Yeah, well, it's the old Swansons, and I think,
The Middle Swansons.
yeah, they, and that's where Buzz lived for a little while, because Buzz he was working at one of the, and I can't remember, but he was like a delivery guy for a pizza place or something, really briefly.
Okay.
But I remember him driving around in it, and of course he had big old hair, and it was sort of like,
Yeah.
hey, that's Buzz right there.
Oh, that's awesome.
And
So there was an apartment near. As you're saying, there was an apartment near the Swansons.
well, no,
and they-
Swansons owned a bunch of
Oh,
apartments.
they owned this part. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they weren't well maintained, and
Yeah.
so they couldn't charge much,